Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Challey Institute Ideas Workshop. So before I introduce our speaker for today, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you're new to the Zoom audience, this is your first time, the way this will work is, during the presentation, you'll see a little note in the chat box that provides a link to a Google Doc. And you can go to that Google Doc and introduce yourself, and then that's also where you'll be able to type in questions for today's speaker. After the end of the presentation, I will read some of those questions to her, and also will be taking questions from our live audience here at NDSU. So again, thank you, and I'm excited to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Rajshree Agarwal, who is the Rudolph P. Lamone Chair and Professor in Entrepreneurship at the University of Maryland and Director of the Ed Snider Center for Enterprise and Markets. Her research interests focus on the implications of entrepreneurship and innovation for industry and firm evolution. She's published articles in journals such as the Academy of Management Journal, American Economic Review, International Journal of Industrial Organization, Journal of Industrial Economics, Journal of Law and Economics, Management Science, Strategic Management Journal, and many others. She also has, I've read a number of her columns in Forbes magazine, which have been very timely and useful, so I'd encourage people to check that out as well. She received her PhD from the University of Buffalo. So please help me, even if only virtually, welcome today's speaker, Dr. Rajshree Agarwal.
Thank you so much. And it is a pleasure to be meeting with you all, at least virtually, if not in physically. And I look forward to having an engaged conversation with you. When the Challey Institute invited me to give a talk, it was, well, choose whatever it is that you want to talk about, because many of the issues that I think about are very, very aligned with some of the principles that Challey Institute itself fosters. And I thought that perhaps the best way to communicate to you is to not necessarily talk about my research or frameworks, but talk about how my research and my teaching and my thoughts have evolved in order to provide a framework about fostering enterprise. So what I'd like to do today is walk you through some of the ways that at least I view individuals living purposeful lives where they are collaborating with others in order to create value. So if I may, I'm going to start sharing screen. Give me just 1 second to orient myself there. And then please let me know if what I am showing you is coming through. 1 second. Let me share screen. It's always a challenge to get that started. So let's see if this works. 1 second. Okay, let's start again. Are you able to see in presentation mode my screen now? Callie, is the screen showing? Yes, great. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to talk to you about is some of my thoughts around fostering enterprise and creating value in trade. And I would really encourage a vibrant question and answer period where you tell me if what I've shared with you resonates with you and is actually helpful for you as you think about your own lives. So to begin with, give me, yeah, let's talk about the term enterprise, right? Usually, when we think about the term enterprise, we think about a unit of economic organization or activity, a business enterprise. Or we can think in terms of systematic, purposeful activity, as in it's a main economic enterprise of these people. Uh, and this is, of course, taken from Merriam-Webster dictionary. But another alternative way of thinking about enterprise actually relates to the entrepreneurial spirit of individuals, if you will, in terms of undertaking a project that can be especially difficult, complicated, or risky, or a willingness to engage in daring or difficult action. So it's in this meaning, both meanings of the term, but particularly in this first meaning, that I would like to engage with you in terms of what does it really mean to foster enterprise. But before I start, let me just ask you, and you can populate the chat very quickly. If I were to ask you of one product or service that you believe you could not live a good day without. And I'm not talking about food, water, shelter, and so on, right? What's the one product that in the days that you could drive around, if maybe you forgot it, this would be the one thing that you would come back home to pick it up and get it? What would that be? And I'm going to look at the chat feature to get some of your answers on this. Earbuds, phone, Austin says. My cell phone. I told you, Rachel, no water, right? We're assuming that that's there. Information about the world. Right. But it seems like the majority of you are already saying that a cell phone is very important. So let me ask you a follow-up question. Who among you has an iPhone and who among you has an Android compatible phone, say a Samsung? Okay, many of you are saying iPhones, Androids. Well, it's equally distributed. So, Kay, if I were to ask you, you have an iPhone, to swap with Joshua, who has an Android, or those of you who have an iPhone, would you be willing to switch to an Android platform? Or if those of you who have an Android, would you switch to an iPhone? Would you do that? No, thanks. Okay. Others? No, no. Okay. So think about what just this very simple example about this one product that, I still remember when there were no cell phones, dumb cell phones, forget about smartphones. And, now this has become certainly indispensable to our lives. So, why is it that that's the case? And what is it about an iPhone, in particular, think Apple producing the iPhone, that makes you say that forget about phones generally? I am not willing to live without my iPhone. Now, that is an enterprising product that's being offered by Apple, right? Why is it that it's become so essential to the way that you live? Again, I'm looking for chat features. You may, chime in as you're looking to think about it. Why has it become one product that you're not willing to live without? Okay, Joshua says it provides me a connection with other humans. Very important. Others? Right, someone said before, I want the information around the world. Well, it certainly allows you, David says, it's convenient to communicate with others. That's true. Alarms and notes and daily planning. Okay, ton of tools that run my daily life, engagement. So if you think about your world being the places you go, the people you meet, and the things that you do, you can see why across all three of these elements, the iPhone or the Android really helps us in all three of these aspects. So no wonder it has become an essential part of your life. My challenge to you is going to be on, if you were to compare now, Apple that produces the iPhone and Tim Cook, who is the CEO of Apple, are you thinking in the same way that Tim Cook does about Apple, about your enterprise, Me Incorporated? So here is what I would like to do in the next 30 minutes that I have with you. What I'm going to do is ask you to think about what are the 4 essential questions that every CEO asks, particularly CEOs like Tim Cook, to provide essential products and services. And are you asking those same questions of yourselves? And then, as we think about these questions, what might be the answers we might use in order to answer those questions? So, thinking like a CEO requires us to think about what is my purpose or mission statement? What does success look like for me? What is my value proposition? And then, with whom should I trade? Let's think about how we can apply these questions to our own lives and how the answers to all of these 4 questions would actually help you think about how you may foster enterprise and create value in trade. So what do my customers need, Ganpati, is very much around the 3rd question, which is what's my value proposition? Right? And so I'm going to ask you, have you thought of your answer to any one of these 4 questions? And I'd like to submit to you that many of you have already started to implicitly create these answers, even if you haven't explicitly done so. So a lot of what I'll be sharing with you is not necessarily things that are going to be new to you, but I'm hoping that by explicating both the questions as well as the framework to think through these answers, I may be able to help you think about this more intentionally and more purposefully. So, as it relates to the question of what is my purpose or mission statement, one of the framing thoughts that comes to this question is one that was provided by John Allison, which it's and he's now retired as the CEO and chairman of BB&T Bank, which is huge on the East Coast in particular, and has now become Truist because it has merged with SunTrust. But the point is that purpose for each and every one of us is really about solving problems that are deeply meaningful to us. In John Allison's words, it is about making the world a better place to live by doing something important for yourself. Now, there are 2 elements to purpose as is defined by this. Oh, by the way, the context of each of our lives and what is a problem that we find meaningful is going to be different. The content is going to be different for each and every one of us. But the context, these 2 framings should be the same. This also means that when you're defining your own purpose, you don't define it in this generic way, because this is saying a general way, but it's not giving specificity to what is it, the problem that you're solving that is making your world a better place to live. And why is this problem the one that is your burning yearning to solve? Put differently, let me also ask you this question. Be honest in the chat. How many of you rolled your eyes when I put in making the world a better place to live? And how many of you felt overwhelmed by this notion of, what do you mean make the world a better place to live? I can't do it by myself. So just some thoughts. I'm trying to get some engagement in here as we go along in the chat too, in terms of whether these thoughts are resonating with you or not. So making the world a better place to live, whenever I give this presentation, I really get 2 types of reactions. One is the rolling of the eye. Come on now, how cliched are you going to be? Making the better world a better place to live? And the second one is, wait a minute, I'm just one person. What do you mean make the world a better place to live? You have just put all of this pressure on myself. But as Ganpati is already saying, if you focus on making your world, the places you go, the things that you do, and the people you meet a better place to live, then you have made, so you focus on your sphere of influence. You make these people in your life are important to you. The things that you do, the places that you go are important to you. And if by making those people, those things, those places better off, then you've made your world a better place. And of course, the one constant in this world is you. And if you're not happy, and if you've not made yourself better off, then your world is not going to be a better place. So, in that sense, if you bring this into your world, your sphere of influence, then identifying what problem you want to solve and why this is important to you is a very important place to think about fostering enterprise. Now, how do I relate to this question? So my purpose is enabling upward mobility in not just the economic, but the economic, psychological, and intellectual realms. So, of course, as soon as you know that this is my purpose, it should be no surprise to you that I'm a university professor and I'm thinking deeply about concepts such as enabling enterprise or fostering enterprise. The second question that one should ask as the CEO of Me Incorporated is, what does success look like to me in, say, 5 years? Now, when I say 5 years, it's not a set in stone 5 years. It's because you want to have enough time into the future that you can start to work towards however it is that you define success. But it shouldn't be so far down the road that you don't know when is it that that success is going to feel tangible. So one of the things that often people say is, you want to write your obituary and think about your, what you've done and how do you believe you've lived your life. That is just A, way too morbid for me, and B, way too far away, so that I want to be living life intentionally and I want to be examining it 5 years at a time. And in 5 years, I want to give myself permission to revisit some of these answers because I'm going to evolve as a person too. So how might you answer this question of what does success look like to me? Well, again, the grounding quote for me on this question is actually by the character of Mark Whitney in The Martian. Now, I don't know how many of you have watched The Martian, but it is one of my all-time favorite movies. And you might say, but Rajshree, you just talked about the fact that you don't want to be thinking about death and morbidity. So why are you bringing up Mark Watney in Martian, where he was stuck in this hostile planet all by himself with no water, no food, not being able to go outside of this hab? And you're saying that this is how you want to talk about defining success? And the reason I like this movie is because it is very purpose driven. The character Mark Whitney is full of a sense of life. And indeed, if you haven't watched this movie, I would recommend that you do so. And I kid you not, within 5 minutes, you will be laughing and enjoying it even as you're absorbed in his journey. And the tagline, of course, is Bring You Home. The other reason why I like this movie is that it's about all of these people coming together in a problem solving approach and helping each other, as opposed to this view that we have of companies or individuals as having to compete against each other. But Mark Watney has this very positive sense of life, and he's always upbeat, except for one time in this movie where he loses hope. He thinks he's not going to make it. So he's by this time able to communicate to the captain of the ship that's turned around to try and get him back. I'm going to give a little bit of that spoiler there to you in case you haven't seen the movie. But he turns around and says, tell my parents. Now think about it. You're under 40. These are two people that matter the most in your life. And this is the last message that you want to give them. What might you want to say? Tell your parents. And indeed, when I've given these talks before, the overwhelming response is, well, tell my parents I love them. And Mark Watney, in fact, says, tell my parents I love what I do and I'm very good at it. And I'll be dying for something big and beautiful and so much more than myself. Tell them I can live with that. I just want you to pause and think about success. We often define success in terms of tangible terms. But to be able to say both elements of this statement all at once, I love what I do and I'm very good at it. That for me is the essence of success. Because often it happens that we can talk about what I love doing, and we can also talk about things that we are good at. But to be able to say both of them together is really bringing your abilities and your aspirations together. So, my suggestion to you is if you want to take these frameworks to find them helpful for you, is answer your first question in terms of the problem you want to solve, your purpose. And then think about all of the activities that need to be undertaken in order to fulfill your purpose. Now, some of those abilities are going to be, some activities are going to really be part of what you're very good at. But some of those activities you're not going to be good at. Again, some of those activities will give you joy to do those things. But others, it's like, this is not really something that I enjoy doing. And that's completely appropriate because any one person is not going to be able to optimize on all of the activities that are required to satisfying one's purpose. So in this context, the first 2x2 that I'm going to provide you is this ability and aspiration matrix, where on the x-axis, you're thinking about what you personally are good at. And on the y-axis, you're going to be thinking about what you love doing. And then you're going to take the activities that need to be accomplished in order to solve that problem that's meaningful to you. And you're going to put them on this matrix. Now, there are going to, of course, be areas where it is going to be activities that you're neither good at nor the ones that you love. Being in this quadrant, I would say, is being miserable. You don't want to be here. The other way to think about it are activities that you love but you're not very good at. These could be activities that serve as a hobby, but they're not necessarily going to be able to create the kind of value you want to do to say that I'm good at something. If you're good at something but you don't really love it, then those activities fall in this quadrant that is just another job. Where you want to be are activities that you're focused on, which is both what you're good at and what you love. That is your calling quadrant. And guess what happens when you are doing these activities? When you're doing something that you're good at, it provides you a sense of self-esteem. When something gives you self-esteem, you start loving it. In which case you want to invest in it and become even better at doing it. So the virtuous spiral between loving something and becoming good at it helps you even more progress into this calling quadrant. And going back to your purpose, what I would encourage you to do is also move activities that are in your hobby quadrant or your just another job quadrant to either into the calling quadrant or into the misery quadrant. Now, why am I saying that you want to do this in the misery quadrant too? Because these are activities that you are going to find somebody else doing those activities and you want to partner with them because for them, these activities are one that they derive joy on and they're very good at. So hang on to that thought. We're going to come back to this a little bit later on too. How do I talk about success for me? So at the Ed Snider Center, as well as in my own personal life, what I love and I'm good at is really about creating new knowledge and developing educational programs that empower lifelong learners from high school through professional contexts. And you can see that this is very much aligned with the purpose that I have already defined as in enabling upward mobility. And the way I do this is thinking through the Snider Center, which focuses on research, teaching, and engagement. And all of the activities of the Snider Center are very much around this problem of enabling upward mobility. We have student leaders, we have the Self Summer Program, we have the Ink Tank, we have research that we do. But all of these things are about enabling upward mobility. And of course, you can see that I'm not going to be able to do all of these components of these activities. However, I have a lot of people that are very good at things that I'm not good at and love doing those things so that they can be my partners in the Snider Center so I can achieve my purpose through the Snider Center, as can they. The third question is about what is my value proposition. Again, what you want to do is have this forward looking direction in 5 years. What activities am I looking at? And now, here, the value proposition is taking the external, right? How am I providing value? How am I making the world a better place? So here, the orienting quote for me is about value from Steve Jobs, who was, of course, the founder of Apple. Notice that what he says is, I don't think it's good that we're perceived as different. I think it's important that we're perceived as much better. If being different is essential to being better, then we have to do that. What Steve Jobs is doing here is reminding us that differences for differences' sakes alone are not providing value. What you really need to do is think about not just your differences in features, but also the benefits that it provides to the people who are your customers. So here again, we can think about your feature benefit matrix as activities or features that you can offer. And that's your x-axis. It's similar to your abilities, but it's in addition to thinking about what you're good at, you want to be thinking about whether this feature is sufficiently unique in the way you provide it, as opposed to how others may provide it. And on the y-axis is what value is this providing to the focal consumer. And you'll notice that I'm putting consumer in quotes out here, because of course, when you're talking about fostering enterprise in yourself, your consumer may be your teammates. They may be your bosses. They may be your subordinates. They may be the customers to whom you're actually providing the service to. But who is the other person that stands to benefit from working with you towards this problem that both of you have identified as meaningful to solve? So if you think about it in a general term, you can think about this first quadrant where you're neither unique about this feature that you're providing, nor is it providing high value and benefits. This is the quadrant where I'm sure none of you will ever be, but it's in this undistinguished and unemployed quadrant where you're really not providing anything that's of unique value, or it's providing benefits to other people. If you're providing a lot of benefits to other people, but you're not necessarily unique, then this is the quadrant where you can become easily cogs in a wheel, easily replaceable. If you're very unique and distinctive about a feature, but it's not providing much value, this is the quadrant where I would say these are features where you're the belle or the prince of the ball, but nobody's coming to your party. So again, the quadrant where you want to focus all of your attention and energy in terms of activities is in honing those features about yourself that not only you're good at, but are and unique at, but also provide high value and benefits to the other person. Now, again, in the context of that purpose that you have defined as meaningful for you, you should take all of the component activities, and originally they're going to be distributed across all four of these quadrants. But in 5 years, you want to be moving them to either the quadrant that we've labeled undistinguished and unemployed, or to the indispensable quadrant. Because the important point out here is that the indispensable quadrant is what you will be doing. But just because you're not unique and you are not providing benefits in the activities that fall in this first quadrant, which for you is undistinguished and unemployed, there might be another person there who's extremely good at those activities and is able to provide high value and benefit by doing those activities. And again, they become your trade partners, which then brings you. So, what's my value proposition? Just to give you context around them. So, what I do very well is integrate research, teaching, and engagement to create unique programs that cater to the needs of the innovative and entrepreneurial spirit and provide the skills, savvy, and moral ground for the producer and the value creator. And my presentation to you is one example of the way that I believe that my thinking and framework can provide value to you. And of course, I'd like to hear from you about whether this presentation itself is providing value to you, and where is it that I can do something else that might provide additional value to you and like-minded others. But this also translates to, in terms of activities that I do through the Snider Center, is in thinking about what is it to have a great place to work, right? What does it mean to have self-determination and taking control of your own life? How do you go about fostering your own enterprise so your journey itself becomes your destination? What does ethical and entrepreneurial leadership really mean? So these are all of the ways that I think seriously about. These are the things that I create Forbes op-eds on. And of course, these are the value proposition that the Snider Foundation also brings to the table. And then the final fourth question is, with whom should I trade? Now, notice that implicit in those first two questions, in the ability and aspiration matrix, as well as in your value proposition matrix, we've already talked about your trade partners. And so the trader principle, which for me is the noblest principle that unites individuals together, the grounding quote here is by Ayn Rand. A trader does not treat men as masters or slaves, but as independent equals. He deals with men by means of free, voluntary exchange, an exchange which benefits both parties by their own independent judgment. Now, how does this equate to you fulfilling your purpose? If you go back to what the two components of your purpose were, it was about making the world a better place to live by doing something important for yourself. Notice that the benefit to you are the things that you love doing. That's your x-axis in this voluntary relationship quadrant, which incidentally was your y-axis in your success quadrant. So what we're doing is taking the y-axis of your success matrix, your ability and aspiration matrix, and putting it down in here as what's the benefit to you? Why is this something that is important to you? And then your value proposition matrix define the benefits that you're providing the other, how you're making the people in your world better, the places in your world better, the things that you do, how are they enabling creation of value? Now, of course, if neither happens, then you're in a lose-lose situation. If the other benefits, but you lose, that's a lose-win. If you win, but the other loses, that's a win-lose. Now, the problem with the lose-win and the win-lose is that neither of these two are sustainable, because one party is seeing no benefits of continuing with this relationship, and they ought to and they should walk away. So if you are in either a lose-win or a win-lose quadrant, you end up being in a lose-lose. So the only sustainable quadrant in a voluntary relationship is a win-win. And of course, notice that this enables you, your ability and aspiration matrix enables you to identify trade partners that are going to be your duals, that do the things that you're not good at and you don't enjoy. Your value proposition matrix is going to allow you to enable your dual, things that they are unique at, but you're not, that provides value towards the purpose that you're serving. And the two of you coming together creates a win win solution that is truly sustainable. So, who do I trade with? I trade with like minded people who are drawn to the positive vision that free and creative individuals are driven to excel and in trading value for value, make the world a better place. And I trade with people who create a virtuous spiral between ability and aspirations in themselves and in others. These are the people who are in my life. On the left panel are all of the staff of the Ed Snider Center. In the middle are all of my research students, my collaborators, and on the bottom are my current collaborators. All of them are essential to me being able to say I love what I do and I'm good at it because I enjoy my journey with them. And together we're solving problems in the area of research, in the area of teaching, and in the area of practice. There are other partners, the Snider Foundation, the Charles Koch Foundation. They provide us the investment in value aligned activities and help us by supporting all of the activities that we do. So, to come back to the answers to the 4 questions that I started off with, what's your purpose? It should be about making the world a better place by doing something important for yourself. Success is loving what you do and being very good at it. Your value proposition should be about creating unique features in yourself that provide value in trade. And then, um, with whom should you trade? Seeking win win relationships because collaboration, not competition, is the hallmark of trade. So, what does all of this mean for you and the organizations that you may choose to associate with? Organizations within business enterprises, nonprofits, or government enterprises too, they're fundamentally made of individuals, individuals that have different goals, different skills, different beliefs. And what these organizations do is unify these differences by a common purpose. And that's, of course, achieved through specialization, through coordination, and through governance. But what this really means for you and I, that are part of any organization that we choose to collaborate with, is a trader Sudoku. And so, if I were to bring it all together, a Sudoku has 9 components to it, 9 numbers that are uniquely to be situated in 9 squares. So, you can think about your trader Sudoku too. The one constant in your trader Sudoku is going to be you. That's the me person. The first choice that you should exercise is who is the you, the trading partner that you want to engage with. And that is a conscious choice. One of the things that I often say to people, surround yourself with people that will lift you up, not bring you down. So that you is very important on those components. But often we think about trade simply in a very transactional basis. What am I going to do? What are you going to do? For sure, those are important, but underpinning those actions is a common objective. What are we trying to accomplish together? And how does that common objective align with my aspirations and your aspirations? So even in the conversation that we're having right now through Zoom, through this presentation and a Q&A, what am I pursuing? You can see that this very nicely fits with my value and my mission of enabling upward mobility. And I'm hoping that you're listening and reacting and corresponding by reflecting on how does this conversation fit with your values and your mission? How might this help in what you're pursuing? And then, of course, Coming together, the last pieces of the puzzles are your capabilities. What do I bring to the table? What do you bring to the table? And I often say, I may bring all of these frameworks to you, but unless and until you are willing to, if these resonate with you in the first place, it's not just about, oh, this is great, I should be thinking about this framework, but what is it that I'm willing to put in as effort towards self reflection, towards identifying purposefully what problem do I want to solve? Why is this fitting with my aspirations and what I'm good at? And what does that then dictate about what I choose to do and what I want others to do? You may also enjoy reading, watching, and learning these following books that have definitely helped me in terms of my own thoughts. John Allison's Leadership Cure, Crisis and the Free Market Cure. James Clear on Atomic Habits that allows you for some very practical strategies to implement some of the things that we've talked about. Deep Work by Cal Newport, Good Profit by Charles Koch. And then, of course, I wrote this article in Forbes, Feeling Isolated or Down, Try These Movies to Regain a Purposeful Life. Martian certainly qualifies in that list along with others. And of course, feel free to go to my website at rajshreeagarwal.com for my op-eds, podcasts, media appearances, if those will provide value to you. I leave you with two quotes, both by Eric Hoffer. One on ability. In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. And the other is on ability, on aspiration. We're often told that talent creates its own opportunities, but it sometimes seems that intense desire creates not only its own opportunities, but also its own talents. Thank you for listening.
Okay, I think I'm back on. Thank you so much for that inspiring presentation. So we've got a few minutes that I'm going to try to take questions from our live audience, and we also have a few questions in our Google Doc. So let me start with the people in the audience here. Is anyone have any questions for our presenter today? What's that? Oh, no, this isn't a question, but our live audience just wanted to thank you. You won't be able to hear hear them clap because they're not mic'd, but they just wanted to send their thanks. So I'll let me read a couple questions to you from the Google Docs. One person asked, "This reminds me of the book, How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. He talks about the importance of setting written goals on the success of people. Is it important to write down the answer to those four essential questions you posed today?"
I would actually put that question back to you. How important is it for you to answer those questions, right? So look, the way that I would say to you, I actually am very selfish about how I spend my time, as should you be. The question of what is important or what is not important is for you to decide first and foremost. And the way that I decide on something that's important for me is whatever enables me to live the best life that I can live, the most purposeful life that I can live, the most meaningful life filled with relationships that matter to me, where I matter to people and people matter to me. Those are the things that I consider important for me. If those are the things that you consider important for you, that's what these set of questions are all about. And we, as I noted to you before, we often have these subconsciously or in the back of our mind. These questions, writing the answers down, brings it back to the forefront. And one of the things that I have often done, and I've answered these questions, as you can tell, for myself, and it's hard. Let me tell you this: doing this work is very, very hard work. I often say to my high school students, right, that as parents, and I'm one parent there, I would say we want you to be happy, but happiness is a lot of hard work. Happiness is that earned sense of self esteem because you believe that you achieved your values. In order to do that, you need to articulate for yourself what your values are. Start with rush writing them and then start prioritizing. So, putting the ideas to paper matters because it allows you to focus. Look at that as data and then start to reflect. So, use it's important because it helps you in the reflection process. It's important because it helps you in the prioritization process. It's helpful, it's important because it helps you lead your purposeful life.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Yeah, actually, what you just said reminds me a little bit of, not to plug my own research here, but it reminds me. I study how people find meaning in life and what the pursuit of meaning does to mobilize people in the pursuit of different goals. And one of the things that you often see is people's fixation on happiness as sort of even if they're not doing it consciously, right? As fixation on happiness as the main goal to then some kind of fulfillment in life, when we often find that it's better to say perhaps the pursuit of meaning will ultimately lead to happiness, because sometimes the pursuit of meaning, as you suggest, is not fun, right? Like it's, some of your goals are difficult, they're stressful, they cause you to have to confront fear and anxiety and your biggest concerns. So yeah, I just think that's not a question so much as I just think you really hit on a great message on kind of the distinction between pure hedonistic happiness and the heavier existential questions of purpose and meaning.
Yeah, and I would agree with everything that you would say. And I would also say that we often equate happiness with momentary whim worship, which is
Yeah.
not what we're talking about in a very deep sense of happiness giving you the sense of, I'm leading a meaningful, joyful life.
Yeah, no, yeah, excellent. I agree totally. So another question we have from our Zoom audience is: entrepreneurship could be risky, of course. While pursuing the purpose of one's life, one might have to give up too much. How can we manage risk while pursuing the purpose of our life?
So, as opposed to the classic vision of an entrepreneur being a risk taker or a risk lover, my own research on this, along with my observations of very successful entrepreneurs, is to see that they are actually risk avoiders, big time. They mitigate risk, they manage risk, but they don't necessarily love risk. Now, the difference is the perception of risk, too. So, I'll give you an example of my own self, right? People looked at me as if I was absolutely crazy, and how risky could I be that I gave up promotion and tenure at University of Central Florida and very successful career in economics to move to University of Illinois into the strategic management area in the business school, start off as a fresh assistant professor with no guarantees of whether or not I was ever going to make tenure. From their vantage point, this was something that I was just, why was I giving up? And by the way, I was also the primary breadwinner in this family. And I had two kids and a husband who was a stay at home dad, right? So this was not just, oh, let me go ahead and indulge my whim and I can try this and I have a cushy safety net to fall back on anyways, right? I did the same thing when I was 21 years old, when I left a very wealthy father who wanted to dictate not only the fact that I couldn't work, but also the person that I would marry. right? And I left that entire inheritance and came in. So I'm using these as examples, not to say, hey, look at what I did, but to say that these would be examples of very, very risky behavior. But for me, there was no risk in it at all, because the alternative option was so much worse as it related to these four questions that I did, that I've answered for you. So if I, in that early time when I left and my father did not speak to me for 6 years, after that, he was the dearest person, the person that I looked forward to in my life, I looked up to. Saying no to him was not easy for me. It was extremely difficult. But I knew that there were two questions that a person cannot renege on: who they choose to marry and what they choose to work on, right? Because those are the fundamental questions or answers that determine your personal and your professional life and what happiness means in that. And those were the questions that I had to take responsibility on. Of course, there were no guarantees. I was going to make my mistakes. I had no certainty when I changed careers that I was going to get tenure or be successful in there. But I knew that that's what I wanted to do because that's what I loved and I was also good at. So I use those components implicitly then, explicitly now, in order to mitigate and minimize risk, because the alternative was far worse than the choices that I was making.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. When I try to do a version of that myself. Whenever I am thinking about something that's like, I don't know if I want to do that, as I try to run the counterfactual of the risk of not doing it, or what are sort of the other unintended consequences if I do something because it's simple or easy or safe. So we have another really good question here. Have you conducted any research or do you have any insights into helping social entrepreneurs who are less interested in the business aspect, but more the social change outcome?
These concepts that we're talking about today apply regardless of where you choose to put your enterprising energies in. So I'm a social entrepreneur, aren't I? I mean, I'm in a nonprofit educational world. I am thinking about causes such as upward mobility, and I am talking to you about how these frameworks have helped me personally make sense and prioritize across the things that I'm doing. So I think that fundamentally, whether you're solving a problem through commercial production and sales of products and services, or you're in the realm of social innovation. And these can be all over the gambit of activities that you would do, right? The founding fathers of this country, that is my country by choice, were social entrepreneurs of the highest order. And they were willing to give up their lives for principles that they believed in, right? Principles of individualism, which are, of course, the cornerstone of the things that I'm talking to you about today. These are all very consistent across those principles. And again, the trader principle applies equally in your romantic relationships, in your friend form of relationships, and of course, in other social interactions, not just trade as construed very narrowly in the for-profit domain.
Yeah, I actually think about that a lot, even with within the family, right? Of decisions of how you run your family or operate things, as these lessons can apply. So I'm certainly glad to see more people, more scholars too, thinking more broadly about ideas related to entrepreneurship.
And a specific answer to whether I have conducted research on it.
Oh yeah.
One of my ongoing research projects is really looking at how nonprofit foundations, such as the Rockefeller Foundation, such as Gates Foundation, such as the Swiss Development Corporation, have actually rethought the way that they provide aid in developing countries. The focus in developing countries is to focus on the technology, the product or the service that might help solve a problem, such as post-harvest loss in countries that are already on subsistence farming, and 40% of their food is now being wasted aside. And what they're starting to realize, as my research shows, is that pilots never fail because you can always put a lot of money, a lot of technology, a lot of smart people in that bubble to solve the problem. But then once you leave, pilots never scale for sustained solutions either. This is a quote from Jan Rosenblum at Gates Foundation. So they have transformed the way that they provide aid in their social entrepreneurial efforts, because now they're focusing on how do we foster enterprise, entrepreneurial companies where they now have the incentive to make sure that the industry thrives. And how do they enable the creation of markets so that these entrepreneurial people can actually trade with each other with full information and making sure that they're solving bottlenecks around the way.
That's a great point. So I'm actually going to ask a question from myself. Since I'm a psychologist, so not surprisingly, this is going to be somewhat of a psychological question. But, one thing I was thinking about as you were presenting today is how your talk was very agency focused, very inspiring. Here's ways to think about how you can take control over your life and your goals and figuring out what you're good at, what you want to do, and all those things. And yet you can juxtapose that perhaps with, a message that we often see in contemporary society, particularly and perhaps ironically in the West, where people are more affluent and have more opportunity, of more of a cynicism of you can't really do anything, you're victims of a rigged system, you're destined by your genes or your environment, or there's other things that shackle you and prevent you from living a fulfilling life. And so I was wondered if you, as a cult, since we're both university professors, if you have messages or thoughts of how you would think about talking to young people about those two very different visions of present day life.
Okay, so I'm going to throw out something that's going to be very provocative. Perhaps you need to invite me again to give one other talk, the title of which is The Injustice of Social Justice.
Okay.
Okay. I've thought a lot about it. I've written a few op-eds on that aspect too. We won't have time in the last 5 minutes of our conversation here today for me to elaborate on that. But let me put it this way. In my own journey, by the way, I started off as an economist who wants to study innovation and entrepreneurship as the twin engines that help foster higher, more affluent status. And in fact, if you look through history, you'll see that countries that became more affluent were at one point in time equally poor to countries that remained less affluent. What really helped foster these countries to become affluent is this agency perspective that we've just provided, that focuses on individual innovators, entrepreneurs taking charge of their environment and seeing how they can solve problems and make it a better place. So I started to study industry and industry evolutions. And then I said, you know what? Industries don't make decisions. That's the context that I'm searching. It's firms through their strategies that make decisions. So I wanted to study strategic management, hence this evolution of that point. And then I realized, duh, and you as a psychologist would have immediately corrected me with that sentence. It's like, Rajshree, firms don't make decisions, people make decisions, right? And so, of course, you need to come down to the people level. And your point is very well taken. And that's one of the things that I hope comes through in this message. People make decisions, but they do it in the context of their aspirations and their abilities. Now, of course, the aspirations and their abilities are going to be bounded by the context that they're in. And, we live much, much better lives than our ancestors did 100 years ago. You want to be the poorest poor in the 21st century as opposed to the king of England in the 18th and the 19th century. Just no question about it, right? The bigger issue, however, is you may inherit whatever position you are in, and you can say that I'm the victim. That doesn't get you anywhere. The reason I focus on agency here is not to say that everything needs to be handed to you. There are no promises. Life gives you no guarantees, right? That's just nature. That's the reality of the world. Now, what do you make out of it? The social justice view of the world that you were just talking about really looks at individual or human relationship as either victim or perpetrator or savior. I don't want to be any of those three. I'm not a victim. I certainly don't want to be a perpetrator. And while I care deeply about issues, I don't want to be this hero that is saving the world too. This is why I say the trader principle is the most noble of our principles, because at a very fundamental level, it grants us a status of human dignity. That whatever it is that I am, whatever it is that I'm capable of doing, I will go. And notice I'm focusing on the journey being the destination. We can talk all along about how me being born in India gave me all of these facts that were going to be so far behind than anybody that's born in the United States and takes a lot of things for granted. And, a lot of people are starving in so many different other countries under very, very bad regimes, right? We can talk about all of that inequality. Yes, that's true. But the best way out of inequality is not to bring the top down, but to raise the bottom up. And to raise the bottom up, you need to foster enterprise.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great answer, a great way to end it. And we'll also, at a good plug for a future potential presentation, we will have to try to bring you in person when we're able to. So I just want to have everyone join me in the live audience and virtually, and thanking Dr. Agarwal.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I hope this was helpful to all of you.
Yeah, thank you so much for a great presentation.